Hi class, in this recording we're going to be focusing on Chapter 1, Content, so let's dive into it. As we look at human anatomy and physiology, there are different fields of study, subcategories or subfields of study within this broad category of human anatomy and physiology. We can have gross anatomy, and when we think of gross, we don't mean yucky or icky, we mean big structure. So if you can see the structure with your naked eyes, your unaided view, that is a gross anatomical structure, and that is typically referred to as a field as gross anatomy. When we look at histology, this is the study of tissues. Typically, because tissues have very small structures, we need to use microscopes to study tissues. And as we look at this word ology, ology refers to the study of, histo refers to tissues. As we look at cytology, cyto is a root word that means cell, ology again meaning the study of. So cytology is the study of cells within the human body. As we're studying the human body, we have a hierarchy of complexity from simplest to most complex. And depending on which figure, we could go with quarks and then subatomic particles and atoms, but we're just going to simplify things and start with the organism. So the organism in the context of this class is the whole human being. And that organism is composed of organ systems are made of organs, so on and so forth. But I want to start from the bottom and then work our way up. So as we look at an atom we'll call our simplest level of organization. And if you take two or more atoms and combine them, you can make a molecule. If you take multiple molecules and combine them, two or more molecules and combine them, you can make a macromolecule. Multiple macromolecules working together for a common purpose, and that's a key phrase there, working together for a common purpose, can make an organelle. Multiple organelles working together for a common purpose make a cell, and this is an important dividing line. The cell, once we get to the cellular level, all of a sudden we are now considered alive. By definition, if it's smaller than a cell, an atom, a molecule, a macromolecule, or organelle, it is non-living. But once we get to the cell, once we combine all these structures, we can now have a living cell, the smallest structural and functional unit of life. If we take multiple cells, two or more cells, and combine them together for a similar purpose or cause, we can make a tissue. Once we take multiple tissues and combine them together, we can make an organ. Multiple organs working together for a common purpose make an organ system. So a brain plus a stomach plus a hair follicle don't make an organ system, even though they are multiple organs. But if you take a stomach plus an intestinal tract plus a liver, they all work together for a common purpose. They can all be within the same organ system. And then if you take those multiple organ systems and combine them, you can make a organism, or an organism, I should say. As we look at human beings, there is variation within human beings. Just look at your face and compare it to the face of your best friend, the face of a sibling, if you have any siblings. Your face is not exactly the same as somebody else's face. We have minor variations on the outside of our bodies. And just like we have minor variations on the outside of our bodies, we have minor variations on the inside of our body, from person to person to person. This is an introductory human anatomy and physiology course, so we're going to focus on teaching the most common variations that are represented within the human race. If you take graduate level A&P, you typically learn the most common, the second common, and occasionally the third most common variation of how things appear within the human body. And just like there's minor variations from person to person, if we're having an in-person lab session, you'll find that there's minor variations from one model in lab to another model in lab. Or if you're studying with computer software, you find that there's minor variations between one computer software program and another computer software program. So what I want to emphasize for you is use a variety, a multitude of study materials so that you can get a better idea of what key characteristics to focus on to identify structures. So as we look at individual humans, some individuals are going to lack certain muscles. Other individuals, for instance, some people can wiggle their ears, some people cannot wiggle their ears. Sometimes people have extra vertebrae or are missing individual vertebrae, or they have extra organs, or they're maybe missing organs, or maybe the organs are fused together. I'm going to skip ahead a slide here. So, for instance, as we look at the kidneys, normally you have two separate kidneys, but maybe the kidneys, if an abnormality appears, you could have different elevations, or you could have the kidneys fused together. Or, as we look at the aorta, this is the most common variation of the aorta, where we have 1, 2, 3 branches coming off of it. But occasionally we have one giant branch and one itty-bitty branch. And then this is my personal favorite because there's more symmetry here. I like it when we have two equal branches coming off of the aorta, and I just wish it was always like that, but it's not. Or maybe you could have 4 branches coming off of the aorta. There's just variations that appear from person to person to person. Let me back up here. So as we're looking at these variations, sometimes, every once in a while, you'll run into an individual that has situs inversus. In other words, the left and right sides of the organs of the inside of the body have been completely flip-flopped. And you can't, within the abdominal pelvic cavity, and you can't tell that by looking at their outside, the outside of the person. But if you open up the individual or do a scan, medical imaging of the individual, you can see how the organs of the abdominal pelvic cavity have been flip-flopped, the left and right. As we're looking at human beings, it's worth emphasizing that we as human beings are alive. And, you know, for something that we all know just intuitively, tacitly so well, it's kind of hard to come up with a good objective definition of what living is. So we have characteristics of life. And for the sake of simplicity, we're going to say that to be alive, you need to manifest all of these characteristics, not just some of these characteristics. So we need to have organization. We need to have compartments within our body. We need to be able to separate chemical reactions within one compartment from another compartment within our body. We need to have cells in our bodies. To be alive, we need to have the smallest structural and functional unit of life. We need to have cells. We need to have metabolism. And in this context, I don't mean burning a lot of calories. I mean having chemical reactions occurring inside of our bodies. And when I say a chemical reaction, I mean that we're making and breaking chemical bonds. We need to have responsiveness. We need to be able to sense a stimulus and then react to that stimulus. Is it cold? I need to go inside where it's warm. Am I thirsty? I need to take a drink. We need to be able to receive information and respond to that information. And we also need to be able to move. We need to be able to move substances within our own bodies, and we need to be able to move our bodies. And if I'm thinking of a plant right now. Plants don't move their bodies very quickly, but they can move their bodies a little bit. They exhibit phototropisms. They tend to grow towards the light so that they can maximize the beneficial metabolic reactions that they need to stay alive. But we as human beings aren't plants, so let's not talk about plants anymore. We also need to maintain homeostasis. This is a key term, and I really should have bolded this in red and underlined. Homeostasis is maintaining a relatively stable internal environment or conditions. So if we're maintaining relatively stable internal conditions, that is homeostasis. And it's important. We need to keep our body temperature about the same. We can have little fluctuations, but if we have a big fluctuation in body temperature, we're going to die. We need to maintain our blood-water concentrations or osmolarity at a relatively stable concentration, blood sugar, blood pH. We need to keep the internal environment of our bodies relatively stable. We also need to have development. We need to have differentiation and growth of the cells of our bodies to be considered living. We also need to reproduce. If we could not reproduce, if we could not make a copy of ourselves, we as a species would cease to exist. It's important for the continuation of society and to be considered alive to have human reproduction. And then we also find that there's changes, little mutations that occur in the genes, the genetic code from one generation to the next generation. There's this buildup of minor variations. And this is referred to as evolution. And these minor changes or these mutations usually, overwhelmingly, are going to be bad. Most people don't like having mutated genes. But every once in a great while, there's a beneficial mutation, and those beneficial mutations hopefully will accumulate and alter the species as a whole over time. That's all we have for this recording. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to post them in the class discussion boards or shoot me an email. And as always, happy studies.